So it's 2024 and you want to start investing, but in order to set yourself up for success, you should make sure that you're following these rules. Before we jump into these rules, let's take a look at a real life example of investing in the stock market in Ireland. Let's say you want to invest in one of the most popular products out there, which is an ETF or index fund which tracks the S&P 500. And based on historic performance, you can expect roughly about a 7% annualized return from this. You may hear figures such as 10% or 11%, but 7% is probably a more conservative and accurate one, so let's stick with that for now. Okay, so now that's 7%. Let's assume that in a single year we actually make that 7% on the S&P 500. What we need to factor in then is Irish tax on ETFs, which is at 41% on profits, and that 7% quickly becomes closer to 4%. And that of course is not guaranteed, because some years it could be lower, you could even make a negative return, but of course it can go the other way too and you can gain more. But for now, let's say after taxes we could be looking at a 4% annualized return from the S&P 500, which as I said is not guaranteed. Okay, with that in mind, let's jump into the steps. And as always, just a reminder that I'm not a financial advisor and do not take this as personalized financial advice. If you do need professional help, please do go ahead and seek it. Okay, the first step, pay off high interest debt. So let's say you have a car loan and that car loan is at 7.5%, which is roughly around the going rate right now in Ireland. One thing that's guaranteed is that you will pay that 7.5% interest on that loan. So if you want to invest but you also have these loans for home improvement, car loans, etc., and they're at that high interest rate, it makes more sense to target that interest, pay that down, and avoid paying them high interest rates which are guaranteed, opposed to risking your money in the stock market where you may not make a positive return. And then what you can do is, as you pay down that loan, let's just assume that you pay off the car loan and then you suddenly have €200 or €300 extra in your bank account every month. That can start to go to investing then as well. Now I'll quickly address the mortgage scenario here as well. This is a different type of debt. Generally it's at a lower interest rate than you would just consumer debt. So let's say for example if you have a mortgage at 2 or 3% or something like that, it may not make as much sense to pay down your mortgage with a priority opposed to investing that money. But again, it's a different debate for different people. It depends on your mortgage rate, depends on your life goals, etc. Generally a mix of paying down your mortgage a bit extra and also investing could be the best option, but it's definitely something to consider. But just keep in mind, when I'm saying pay down this high interest debt, I'm not really talking about mortgages, I'm more talking about consumer debt like car loans and other things like that. Moving on to step 2 then, and this is an emergency fund. And as the name suggests, this is a fund that you dip into for emergencies. There's a general rule when it comes to investing, and it's you want to leave your money in the investment vehicle for 4 to 5 years just to allow your money the best chance of making that positive return. For example, if you invested in the S&P 500 and 1 year later you're minus 5%, the next year it could be a great year and you could be up 15% overall. So generally you want to be able to leave it in for that 4 or 5 year period at least to allow it to have a good chance of making some gains. So the reason we need the emergency fund in place is, let's assume we don't have an emergency fund, we start to invest our money, we get a flat tire on the car, we have no spare cash, we end up pulling it out of the investment account, and then there's fees to consider. There's also the fact that your money could be worth less than it was. You could end up then missing out on the best days in the stock market, which generally boil down to a couple of days. So it's just generally a bad idea to not have an emergency fund set up before you start investing. So the best place to start with the emergency fund is get it to €1,000. At least you have a bit of a back burner there that you can dip into if anything does go wrong. And then from there you can generally build it up, depending on your individual needs, if you have a family, etc., to about 3 to 6 months of expenses. Now of course it doesn't all have to be done at one time. You can get it to that 1,000 and then you can start investing while also building up your emergency fund as well. The next thing that I would consider when it comes to investing is your pension. Now while this is a form of investing, a lot of people see this as a real boring way of investing and often put it off until later years. But in fact, especially in Ireland, this is one of the most tax efficient forms of investing. So if you wanted to invest with a goal of being retirement and you're not looking at your pension, it's a big mistake. Not only do you get the tax relief at 20 or 40% depending on your income tax bracket, but many employers also provide a matching contribution, or many even double your contribution as well if you have a good employer. So that could mean in some situations you could be getting 10 or 20% of your salary put into your pension fund, all tax-free. Not only that, within the fund then it will also grow tax-free, which you can't get anywhere else. And then when it comes to drawing down on your pension, you can also get a big lump sum of up to €250,000 from your pension tax-free. Again, I have a video on pensions, so I'll leave that linked up here as well if you want to check that out in more detail. But moral of the story here, the whole point of this step is make sure you look into your pensions. At minimum, if your employer is doing a matching contribution, make sure you max that out where possible before you start to look at investing on your own. And my final step then, and I will have a more in-depth video coming out covering all the basics of how to get started investing in Ireland in 2024, but for this step I would say just learn a little bit about the stock market. I know a lot of people want to start investing but then don't want to really learn anything about it. I'm not saying you need to know everything, but I would say learn a little bit about the stock market, learn kind of what drives companies' valuations up, maybe look at something like the PE ratio and the market cap of stocks, just to understand a little bit more. I know right now maybe that doesn't make sense to you, but do a little bit of research before you go putting your money into this. And even if you want to go down the simple route of investing in an ETF like the S&P 500 for example, learn what the S&P 500 is, learn which of the companies are actually driving the most percentage gain, because often you'll find a small number of them 500 companies are actually producing the biggest gains. Just understand a little bit more what's involved. But anyway, those are my tips to consider before you start investing in 2024. Hopefully they helped, and as always, make sure you use the comment section below to share some tips with each other on things that you would say are important before you get started investing. Really appreciate the support, and if you could drop a like on that video, it would be absolutely amazing, and make sure you do subscribe to the channel for lots more content as well.